It was a hot summer day when I decided to go for a walk in the woods behind my house. I had been exploring the woods for years, but I had never ventured far from the main trails. This time, I was feeling adventurous, so I decided to follow an old, overgrown path that led deeper into the forest. I had been walking for about an hour when I came across an abandoned railroad track. The tracks were rusty and overgrown, and the ties were rotting. I stopped to look at them for a moment, wondering how long it had been since a train had passed through here. I decided to follow the tracks, thinking that they might lead me to an old depot or some other interesting place. I walked for another hour or so, but I didn't see anything but trees and brush. I was about to turn around and go back when I saw something in the distance. It was a small, wooden shack. It was boarded up and falling apart, but it still had a door. I walked up to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I looked around for a way to get inside, but I couldn't find one. I was about to give up when I heard a noise coming from inside the shack. It sounded like someone was moving around. I put my ear to the door and listened. I could hear footsteps and whispers. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew that I should leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was too curious about what was inside the shack. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The shack was dark and dusty. The only light came from a few cracks in the walls. I could see a few pieces of furniture, but they were all covered in cobwebs. I took a step inside and closed the door behind me. I could hear my heart beating in my chest. I was afraid, but I couldn't stop myself from exploring. I walked through the shack, looking around. There was a living room, a kitchen, and a bedroom. The bedroom had a bed, a dresser, and a nightstand. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up a picture frame. The picture was of a young woman. She was beautiful, with long black hair and brown eyes. I turned the picture frame over and looked at the back. There was a name written on the back, Jessica. I put the picture frame down and walked out of the bedroom. I went back to the living room and sat down on the couch. I closed my eyes and thought about Jessica. I wondered who she was and what had happened to her. I wondered if she had lived in this shack. I opened my eyes and looked around the living room. I could see a fireplace in the corner. I walked over to the fireplace and looked inside. There was a pile of ashes in the fireplace. I reached down and picked up a handful of ashes. They were cold and gritty. I let the ashes fall from my hand. I knew that Jessica was dead. I stood up and walked out of the shack. I closed the door behind me and walked away. I never went back to that shack again. But I never forgot about Jessica. I often wonder what happened to her. And I often wonder if her ghost still haunts that old shack. My fiancée's voice was on a disturbing DVD I received 3 days before our wedding. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to post on a forum like this, but I'm desperate. My wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that I'm still running from. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Lily, 28 years old, and I was engaged to James for a little over a year. We met at a charity fundraiser, hit it off immediately, and it had been a whirlwind romance ever since. He was charming, successful, and came from a well-respected family in our small town of Oakwood. Everything seemed perfect. The wedding was planned down to the last detail. My family was thrilled, James' family was ecstatic, and I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. We had chosen a charming venue, a beautiful outdoor garden with a canopy of trees that would provide shade for the ceremony. I had picked out the perfect dress, a flowing white gown with delicate lace details, and James had found a handsome suit that complemented it beautifully. 3 days before the wedding, I got a package delivered. It was a plain brown envelope with no return address. Inside, there was a plain DVD, no title, no label, just a blank disc. I was confused, but not overly alarmed. A friend had recently gotten a hilarious DVD from her roommate as a gag gift, so I assumed it was something like that. That night, I put on the DVD. I expected something ridiculous, a silly prank, Maybe a poorly edited video of my friends making fun of me. Instead, what I saw sent chills down my spine. The video began with a close-up of James' face. His eyes were wide and filled with fear, his expression one of pure terror. He was clearly distressed, his voice shaking as he spoke. "This is for my mother. I have to do this. I can't tell anyone, they'll. He trailed off, his voice cracking with emotion. Then, he disappeared from view, replaced by a blurry image of a dark, empty room. The video then cut to a grainy, shaky scene of James in a dark, abandoned warehouse. He was bound and gagged, his face covered in bruises. There was a man standing over him, his face obscured by the shadows. The stranger began speaking, his voice low and menacing. "You think you can escape, James? You think you can get away with what you did? We know your secret, James. And we're going to make you pay." As the stranger spoke, James struggled against his restraints. His eyes darted around frantically. He looked terrified, desperate. He tried to say something, but the man covering his mouth silenced him. The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the blank screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I replayed the video over and over, trying to make sense of it. It couldn't be real. It had to be a prank, a cruel joke, but something felt so unbelievably real about it. I felt a cold dread creeping into my bones. I called James, my voice trembling. He answered, his voice nonchalant. "Hey, babe. What's up?" "James, I just got this DVD, I stammered, my voice catching in my throat. It's terrifying. I need to see you now." "Whoa there, honey. It's 3 days before our wedding, I'm busy. Can't you wait until later?" "No, James, please, I need to see you now." Reluctant but acquiescing, James said he would be over in an hour. The hour was the longest of my life. I tried to calm myself down, rationalize what I had seen, convince myself it was a prank. But the fear gnawed at me, the images from the video playing on repeat in my head. When James arrived, he seemed unfazed, even amused. "Lily, what's all this about? A DVD? Is this some friend of yours playing a joke? James, you have to see this." I pleaded, showing him the DVD. He watched the video, his expression shifting from confusion to annoyance to anger. "What the hell is this, Lily? This is ridiculous. Why would you even believe this? You know I would never do anything like this, right?" He was agitated, almost furious, but his anger seemed off to me. Like there was something else behind it. "I don't know, James. But it's you in the video. It's your voice." He grabbed the remote and turned off the DVD. "Lily," he said, with a forced calmness, "you need to chill out. It's just a prank. A bad one, I admit, but it's a prank. We have no time for this drama, we have a wedding to plan, remember? Let's go out for dinner, relax, forget about all this nonsense." I looked at him, his carefully crafted facade beginning to crumble. His anger was too much, too fast, too manufactured. He was trying to cover something up, and I didn't know what it was. We had a tense dinner, and he went home early, leaving me alone with the gnawing fear in my stomach. I knew something was wrong, and the DVD, despite its obvious flaws, was a red flag waving in my face. The next day, I tried to talk to James again, to tell him I was scared, but he refused to discuss it. He brushed it off, calling it an elaborate prank played by some bored teenagers. I found myself increasingly isolated, unable to tell anyone about the video for fear of being ridiculed. The wedding day arrived, a blur of nervous excitement and crippling anxiety. I tried to focus on the beautiful ceremony, the joy of my family, but the DVD replayed in my mind, the image of James' terrified face haunting me. During the reception, my unease turned to outright terror when I saw a familiar face in the crowd. The man from the video, the one who had threatened James, was there, watching us, a cold smirk playing on his lips. He was right in front of me, standing by the bar, a shadow playing on his face. But only I could see him. It was like he was invisible to everyone else. I felt a wave of nausea, my heart pounding against my ribs. I excused myself from the reception, saying I wasn't feeling well. I wanted to leave, to get away from this whole thing, but I was trapped. The man from the video was here, watching, and I was terrified of what he might do. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't go to the police, there was no evidence. I couldn't turn to my family, they'd think I was crazy. All I could do was wait, hope that James could figure out what was going on, hope that he would tell me the truth. Later that night, I found James in the bridal suite. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot, his face drawn. He sat on the edge of the bed, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "James, we need to talk," I said. "Lily, I told you, we'll talk about this tomorrow. We're married now, it doesn't matter anymore." "It does matter, James. I saw that man at the reception, the one from the video. I saw him, James." He looked at me, his expression shifting from annoyance to fear. "Lily, you're tired, you're stressed. You're just imagining things. He's not here." "He is here, James. I saw him," I insisted. "What is going on? What did you do? Who is that man?" James sighed, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else, shame. He stood up, pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists. "I can't tell you, Lily. I can't. You don't understand." "I don't understand?" "I saw your face, James, your terrified face on that video. That man was threatening you, James." "What happened? Who is that man?" The man is, he's after me, Lily. He knows about my secret." "What secret, James?" I demanded, tears welling up in my eyes. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "It's a long story, Lily. A long, dark story. James, please tell me." He took a deep breath, his voice barely a whisper. "I stole something, Lily. Something important, something very valuable. The man in the video is the person I stole it from. He's dangerous, Lily. He's going to stop at nothing to get what he wants." "What did you steal, James?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. "I can't tell you, Lily. It's too dangerous." "Then what are we going to do?" "You're in danger, James, we're both in danger." He reached for my hand, his touch cold and clammy. "I know, Lily. I know. We need to leave, get away from here. We need to disappear." "Disappear? How can we do that? Where will we go? What about my family?" "We can't tell anyone, Lily. It's too risky. I'll take care of everything, I promise. We'll get out of here, we'll start over somewhere new. But we have to leave now. We have to leave tonight." I was scared, confused, and utterly bewildered. My wedding day, the happiest day of my life, had turned into a nightmare. My fiancé, my soulmate, was a thief, a man hiding from a dangerous man. I didn't know what to do. "James, I need to talk to someone, my parents, my sister." He shook his head, his eyes dark and frantic. "No, Lily. No one can know. We have to go, now. Just trust me." He grabbed a suitcase from the closet and began packing. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing, moving with a quiet efficiency that was both reassuring and frightening. He threw a few clothes into the suitcase, stuffing it until it was overflowing. "We don't have much time, Lily, we have to go." I stood there, stunned, watching him pack, my mind spinning. My wedding day, my future, my life, it was all falling apart. "James, where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked up at me, his face grim. "It doesn't matter, Lily. Just trust me." He finished packing, then grabbed my hand. "Let's go, Lily. We have to leave now." I felt a cold wave of terror wash over me. I didn't know what to think, what to do. But the look in James' eyes, the terror and desperation, the way he was pushing me to leave, to run, it was all too real. I was scared, but I knew I had to go. I grabbed my own suitcase, the one filled with my wedding clothes, my dreams, my future. We walked out of the bridal suite, into the dark night, the weight of James' secret heavy on our shoulders. We drove through the night, James at the wheel, his face pale and tense. He drove for hours, his eyes fixed on the road, never speaking, his silence as heavy as the secret he was carrying. I knew we were heading out of Oakwood, away from everything I knew, leaving behind the life I had built, the dreams I had dreamt. I had no idea where we were going, but I knew it was a one-way trip. We were running from something, running from someone. I felt like I was in a nightmare, a dark, twisted fairy tale. My wedding day, the day I had planned for forever, the day I had envisioned as the happiest day of my life, had become a prelude to a life of fear and uncertainty. I was running, but I didn't know what I was running from. I was with James, but I didn't know who he really was. I was married, but I didn't know what my future held. All I knew was that I was afraid, deeply afraid, and that I was in over my head. We drove all night, stopping only for gas and to use the bathroom, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the silence between us. The sun rose, casting a pale light on the unfamiliar landscape surrounding us, and I knew we were far from home. James pulled over at a deserted roadside diner, the only sign of life in the desolate landscape. He ordered coffee and a greasy breakfast, his face still tense, his eyes never leaving the parking lot. I barely touched my food, the whole situation weighing heavily on me, the weight of James' secret pressing down on me. I tried to think, to process what had happened, but my mind felt numb, a blank canvas unable to paint the chaotic scene playing out before me. "We have to go, Lily," James said, as we climbed back into the car. "They'll be looking for us. We can't stay in one place too long." He drove, his speed increasing, his eyes fixed on the road, his jaw clenched tight. We sped along, passing through small towns and desolate highways, the landscape changing from the familiar plains of Oakwood to the rolling hills of a different state. We slept in motels, cheap and dingy places, James always taking a room at the end of the hallway, his door locked and bolted from the inside. He seemed to be in a constant state of anxiety, constantly checking the windows, the doors, the parking lot. He wouldn't let me talk to my family. He wouldn't let me tell anyone where we were, what was happening. He was afraid, I could see it in his eyes, the terror and the desperation, the constant fear of being caught. He lived in a world of shadows, and he had dragged me into it. I didn't know what his secret was, but I knew it was a darkness that threatened to consume us both. One night, we were checking into a motel in the middle of nowhere, a small town in the middle of the desert. We had been driving for days, and I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As James was filling out the registration form, I noticed a man watching us from across the parking lot. He was wearing a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows of the hood. He kept glancing at us, his eyes cold and calculating. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew that man. I had seen him in the video. I saw him at the reception, the man who had threatened James, the man who had stolen his secret. He was here, in this desolate town, miles away from Oakwood, tracking us. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to alarm James, to add to his already overwhelming fear. But as we walked inside, I saw the man following us, his steps silent and menacing. I grabbed James' arm, my voice low and urgent. "James, that man, he's following us. He's the one from the video, the one who threatened you." James turned to see the man, his face a mask of fear. "We have to run, Lily. We have to get out of here now." We ran, sprinting across the parking lot, the man's footsteps behind us, echoing in the stillness of the night. We stumbled into the motel room, James locking the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His eyes were wild, his face a study in terror. "Lily, we can't stay here. He'll find us. We have to leave." He frantically began packing, throwing clothes into a suitcase. We had no time to think, to plan, to decide what to do. We had to run, again, driven by the fear of the man outside who was closing in on us. We sprinted out of the motel room, the man in pursuit, his steps heavy and menacing. We ran across the parking lot, towards the dark emptiness of the desert, the man hot on our heels. As we ran, my mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to understand who this man was, what he wanted from us, why James had stolen whatever it was he had stolen. We ran until we couldn't run anymore, collapsing on the sand, panting, our lungs burning, our bodies exhausted. We lay there, huddled together, the wind whipping sand in our faces, the stars above us a cold, indifferent witness to our terror. The man was still there, standing in the distance, watching us, his figure a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. He didn't move, just watched, his presence a palpable threat, a weight that pressed down on us. "What do we do, James?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, he just stared at the man, his face a mask of fear and despair. He was lost, just as lost as I was. We were trapped, caught in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. The man in the desert, the man with the secret, the man who was hunting James, was closing in. And there was nothing I could do to stop him. The Nevada desert stretched out before me, a vast canvas of ochre and beige. The sun, an unforgiving orb in the cerulean sky, beat down on the parched earth, baking the air to a stifling heat. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional chirping of a lone bird or the rustle of a lizard in the sand. My boots kicked up dust as I walked towards the entrance of the cave, a gaping maw in the stark landscape. The cave was a popular destination for adventurous cavers, its entrance marked by a weathered sign that read "Danger, proceed at your own risk." I had been intrigued by local legends whispered about the cave, tales of lost treasure, ancient spirits, and a haunting presence that lingered within its depths. I scoffed at these stories, attributing them to overactive imaginations and the desert's ability to play tricks on the mind. The entrance was narrow, forcing me to stoop and squeeze through. The air inside was cool and damp, a welcome relief from the scorching heat outside. As I moved deeper, the cavern opened up, revealing a vast chamber choked with stalactites and stalagmites, their shapes formed by millions of years of dripping water. The darkness within the cave was almost absolute, swallowing the light from my headlamp and leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable. The ground beneath my boots was surprisingly smooth, almost polished, and the silence was deafening. There was a strange sense of stillness within the cave, as if the very air itself was holding its breath. I moved forward cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I was a lone explorer, venturing into the unknown, and a sense of exhilaration mixed with trepidation coursed through me. With each step, I felt the weight of the darkness pressing down on me, the silence amplifying the sound of my own breathing. I stopped to take a breath, my hand resting on the rough, cold wall. It was then that I saw it, a flash of white in the dim light of my headlamp. It was a small, white shoe lying abandoned on the floor, its laces frayed and its once pristine white surface stained with dirt. I bent down and picked it up, its leather soft and brittle beneath my touch. It was a child's shoe, size 5, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I looked around, searching for more shoes, and there they were, a pile of children's shoes, scattered across the floor like discarded toys. There were sneakers, sandals, boots, and even a pair of tiny ballet slippers, all worn and faded, their colors dulled by time and neglect. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Were these the shoes of lost miners or children who had wandered into the cave and perished? Or were they something more sinister? The legends suddenly felt less like folklore and more like a chilling possibility. I moved further into the cave, following a path marked by the scattered shoes. The air grew colder, and a strange, metallic odor filled my nostrils. I could hear the faint sound of dripping water, echoing in the cavernous space. It wasn't just shoes that lay scattered around. I saw bone fragments, some small, some large, bleached white by the darkness. They were human bones, fragments of skulls, ribs, and femurs, all scattered across the floor like discarded trinkets. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. The silence within the cave seemed to thicken, the air thick with a sense of dread. The legends were true. The cave was haunted, and I had stumbled upon its dark secret. I wanted to run, to escape the suffocating presence that seemed to cling to me, but I was frozen in place, my body numbed by fear. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I had to get out of here. I turned and retraced my steps, my eyes darting nervously around, searching for signs of danger. I moved quickly, my mind filled with images of the bones and shoes, the chilling testament to a tragedy long forgotten. The way back felt longer, the cave seemed to stretch out before me, its darkness suffocating. I could feel the presence of something unseen, something malevolent, lurking in the shadows. The drip of water sounded louder, its rhythm a relentless counterpoint to the pounding of my heart. Finally, I reached the entrance, the sliver of light a beacon in the suffocating darkness. I stumbled out of the cave, blinking in the sudden glare of the desert sun. The heat, which had seemed unbearable before, was now a welcome embrace. I collapsed on the ground, my body trembling, my mind reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. I lay there for a long time, catching my breath, trying to process the events of the past few hours. The silence of the desert was now a soothing balm, its vastness a comfort after the claustrophobia of the cave. I felt a deep sense of relief, a profound sense of gratitude for having escaped the chilling experience. But as I stood up, preparing to leave the cave, I noticed something, a small, white shoe, lying on the sand just outside the entrance, its laces frayed, its white surface stained with dirt. It was a child's shoe, size 5. I stared at it, my heart sinking, the silence of the desert more deafening than ever. I used to like hiking. I say used to, because if I ever get out of here, I'm never doing it again. I live in West Virginia and just about the only good things about it, really, are the nature and the folklore, so I've always spent as much time as I could outside. I've encountered some relatively weird stuff up until this point, so when I saw the staircase leading down into the ground in the middle of the woods, on the side of a mountain, it barely fazed me. In fact, it really intrigued me. You hear a lot of stories about feral people in the hills out here and all that, and they're the first thing I thought of. But I told myself that was stupid, none of that's real, and worrying about it shouldn't stop me from checking out something cool that I'd never seen before. It was a Tuesday, just an ordinary day for me. I had taken the day off work to relax. I had no plans, no place to be, so I just decided to wander. This was my usual way of relaxing, getting lost in the woods. It was early afternoon when I found the staircase. I was at the top of a hill, overlooking a valley. The woods were thick and green, the sun dappled through the leaves. I was just admiring the view when I saw it. It was a set of stone steps, carved into the mountainside, leading straight down. I'd never seen anything like it before. There were no railings. I could see about 10 steps down into the hole, maybe 20 feet deep, but the darkness below the 10 steps swallowed the rest of the staircase. I could see, based on the length of the steps that had been carved, that hole led somewhere. I debated with myself for a second. This was probably nothing. Probably just a dumb old mine shaft that maybe someone had carved stairs into years ago. Maybe some people used it to go down to the bottom of the mountain and use it as a shortcut to the road. It was very possible that I was the only one who had been up here, and the only one who had seen this in ages. I was right on the edge of the park. But there was that feeling. That gut feeling, that tickle of adrenaline that told me this was something more. I couldn't just leave it. I took a step toward the hole, then another and another. I felt my hand instinctively reach out to feel the stone wall next to me. The feel of the rough stone was comforting. Even though I was standing on the edge of a hole in the earth, I felt a sense of security. Maybe it was just the fact that the stone wall was there. Or maybe it was the feeling of the wind that was whipping around me, sending leaves spiraling around my legs. Or maybe it was because I knew in my heart that I wasn't alone. I took another step forward, and then another, until I reached the first step of the staircase. I hesitated for a moment, then started to descend. It was steep and narrow, but the carved stone felt sturdy under my feet. The darkness below closed in, but I wasn't afraid. I felt a strange sense of anticipation. I was excited to see what was at the bottom of this hole. I had descended about 10 steps when I heard it. It was a faint sound, a soft whirring, a kind of humming. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. I stopped and listened. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it was definitely there. My heart started to beat faster. My hand instinctively reached out to the wall, just to be sure I wouldn't fall. I felt my fingers brush against something soft. A kind of moss or growth that felt like velvet to the touch. It was cold and damp, and there was something about the way it yielded to my fingers, the way it felt and smelled, that made me uneasy. I took another step down, and as I did, the humming became louder. I couldn't see anything, not even a flicker of light, but I knew something was down there, something alive. I was starting to feel a little uneasy, a little scared. But I couldn't turn back. I had come too far. I continued down the steps until I reached the bottom. The staircase opened into a small, square room, maybe 10 feet wide and 15 feet long. But it was not just an empty room. It was filled with a strange light. The light was coming from a single, large, pulsating orb in the center of the room, a deep blue and kind of transparent, like a jellyfish. It was about 3 feet wide and glowing with an ethereal light, and as it pulsed, the humming sound grew louder. The walls around the orb were covered with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift, like they were alive. I was mesmerized. I took a step forward, drawn toward the orb by its light and its strange power. I couldn't resist its pull. It was like I was in a trance. I reached out and touched the orb, and as I did, the humming stopped and the room filled with an intense energy. The light from the orb pulsed and rippled, and then it started to glow even brighter, and the symbols on the walls began to dance. I pulled my hand back, startled. I could feel a tingling sensation in my fingers. I felt myself being pulled toward the orb, as if it was calling to me. It was a strange sensation, like I was being drawn to something deeply familiar, but also something I feared. I didn't have time to decide whether or not to fight it, because suddenly, a voice echoed through the room. It was a low, resonant voice, a voice as old as time. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, but it spoke to my soul, my mind, and my very being. It spoke to my fears and my desires, my hopes and my dreams. It spoke to me of a world beyond my understanding, a world of magic and power, a world where the impossible was possible. I felt myself drawn into the orb, into the light, into a world of wonder and possibility. I felt my body being pulled, my mind being stretched, my soul being tested. It was an experience of pure sensation, pure joy. And then, it was gone. I felt myself falling, plummeting through darkness. The faint scent of moss and dampness that I had felt on the wall seemed to grow stronger, and the humming sound that had drawn me to the orb seemed to fade away. The light of the orb faded, and the room grew darker. I landed with a thud on the ground. I was back in the room with the orb, but now the orb was gone, and so was the humming. And the room, though still dimly lit, seemed different. The symbols on the walls were still there, but they were different. They were more defined. Brighter. More vibrant. I had been gone, for however long, and the room, and the staircase, and the world outside were all different. I could feel it. I sat up. The room was dark now, except for a faint glow emanating from the symbols on the walls. They were so vivid now, so real, that it almost seemed as if they were trying to communicate with me. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. But it seemed as if the room had shrunk. The walls were closer, the ceiling was lower. The air felt thicker. The room had changed, and I, somehow, was different. I got to my feet and tried to walk, but my legs felt weak. I stumbled. I fell to my knees. I tried to stand again, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I felt like I was made of lead. I tried to call out, but no sound came out of my mouth. I tried to raise my arms, but they felt heavy like tree trunks. I was stuck. I was trapped. I was alone. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to regain my strength. But eventually I did. I managed to stand up, and I started to walk. I wasn't sure where I was going. All I knew was that I needed to get out of this room. I needed to get back to the world I knew. I walked toward the stairs, hoping they would lead me back to the surface. I stepped up the first step, the second, the third. But as I did, the staircase started to twist and turn, the steps becoming irregular and uneven. The stairs felt different. I could feel the moss and the cold dampness of the stone, the rough feel of the stone under my bare feet. And I could hear the humming sound again. The humming sound was now louder, more insistent. It was urging me forward, pulling me down into the darkness. The walls were closing in, the ceiling was lower, and the air was getting thicker. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the fear tightening my throat. I wanted to turn back, but I couldn't. It was as if something was pulling me forward, forcing me down the stairs. I could feel the stone under my feet, the moss against my skin, the cold dampness of the air. And I could hear the humming sound, growing louder, more insistent. I was trapped. I didn't know how long I walked, how long the stairs wound down into the earth. All I knew is that I was going deeper and deeper into a darkness that felt like it was swallowing me whole. And the humming sound was getting louder and louder, until it seemed to fill my entire being. I felt myself being pulled forward, falling faster and faster, until I didn't know where up was and where down was. I felt the ground rushing up to meet me, and then I felt nothing. I don't know where I am or how to get back. I woke up to the sound of a strange, high-pitched voice. Hello? Hello? The voice was coming from above. I could hear the sound of a human voice, but it was distorted, as if it was coming through a radio. I tried to call out, but no sound came from my throat. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was made of lead. I tried to understand where I was, but it was all so strange. I felt something next to me, like a wall, and I could feel the moss on it. It felt cold and damp, and I could still hear that humming sound. It was getting louder now. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I felt like I was paralyzed. Hello? Can you hear me? The voice was getting closer now. I could feel the ground shaking. I tried to call out again, but nothing came. I could just hear the buzzing, the humming, and the voice, growing closer. I don't know what's going to happen now. I don't know where I am or how to get back. I just hope I'm not alone. I never meant to get involved. It was just a casual stroll through the park, enjoying the crisp autumn air, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet, the pale sunlight filtering through the bare branches. A perfectly ordinary day. Until I saw him. He was sitting on a bench beneath a giant oak, its leaves already turning a fiery red. He wasn't particularly remarkable, just an older man with a weathered face and a thick gray beard. He wore a worn leather jacket and faded jeans, his hands clasped around a steaming mug. He was humming a tune, a melancholic melody that seemed to fit the autumnal atmosphere. Except he wasn't humming. He was whispering. His lips barely moved, but the words were clear, emanating from his mouth like smoke from a chimney. He was chanting, his voice low and guttural, a language I didn't recognize. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I'd always been a curious person, drawn to things that were off-limits, secrets that whispered in the shadows. So, despite the icy fear that gripped me, I stayed. I was transfixed, drawn in by an invisible force. The chanting continued, growing in intensity. His voice resonated with an almost otherworldly power, the air around him shimmering with a faint, unnatural glow. He was summoning something, I could feel it. His eyes snapped open, their depths filled with a cold, calculating light. I saw my own reflection in them, a flicker of recognition, followed by a chilling dread. His lips curled into a cruel smile, and a single word escaped his lips. Scene. The world around me dissolved in a dizzying rush of color and sound. I was no longer in the park, no longer surrounded by the comforting embrace of nature. I was in a place that defied logic and reason, a realm of shadows and whispers, a place where the air tasted of decay and the ground was littered with bones. He was there, the old man, his face a mask of predatory delight. His eyes, cold and penetrating, held me captive, their gaze heavy with an ancient power. You saw what you weren't supposed to see, he hissed, his voice a rasping whisper, the sound of dry leaves crackling underfoot. And now you must pay the price. He was a figure from a nightmare, a being from the deepest, darkest corners of my subconscious. An ancient entity, cloaked in shadow and wielding a power beyond my comprehension. What do you want? I stammered, my voice trembling. Fear paralyzed me, the only language I could speak. He laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that made the ground beneath me vibrate. I want what I always want. What every shadow wants. I want your soul. He stretched out his hand, his fingers long and thin, tipped with claws that glistened with a sickly green light. My heart pounded in my chest, a wild, desperate drumbeat. I wanted to run, to scream, to disappear, but my body was frozen in place, frozen by the sheer terror that gripped me. He grasped my arm, his touch cold and clammy as the grave. A current of energy ran from his hand to mine, searing my skin with a chilling pain. It was a draining touch, one that sucked the life out of me, leaving me weak and drained. You have chosen your fate, he said, his voice a guttural rumble, and now you must accept it. He pulled me towards a gaping chasm in the ground, a swirling abyss of darkness that seemed to have an insatiable hunger. I felt a pull, a relentless force that tugged me towards the precipice. No! I cried, my voice a desperate plea lost in the swirling darkness. I tried to resist, but my efforts were futile. He was stronger than me, his power far exceeding anything I could imagine. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. You cannot escape your destiny. He hurled me into the abyss, my body tumbling through the darkness like a leaf caught in a whirlwind. I scrambled, clawing at the edges of the chasm, but it was too late. The darkness engulfed me, suffocating me, leaving me lost in a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. I landed with a sickening thud, my body twisted and broken, my breath stolen from my lungs. I lay there, crushed by the weight of my own fear, unable to move, unable to speak. A deep, guttural laugh echoed through the darkness. Welcome to the underworld. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own fear, my fate sealed by a single, fateful mistake. The laughter continued, a mocking chorus that sounded more like a symphony of my own despair. I lay there, broken and defeated, as the shadows closed in, their icy embrace slowly snuffing out the last embers of my hope. I have seen things I wasn't meant to see. And now I must face the consequences. My life has changed. The world I once knew, with its familiar rhythms and comforting routines, has been shattered, replaced by a world of shadows and whispers, a world where the lines between reality and nightmare have blurred. I am haunted by the memory of his piercing gaze, his cold, predatory smile. I am haunted by the chilling words he spoke, you have chosen your fate. I am not the same person I was. A part of me is broken, irrevocably damaged. I carry the weight of his touch, the chilling memory of his power. I have become a prisoner in my own mind, a walking nightmare trapped in a reality that I can no longer comprehend. But even as I succumb to the despair, a tiny flicker of hope remains, a faint whisper in the darkness that refuses to be silenced. Maybe there is a way out. Maybe there is a way to break free from the chains of my fear. Maybe there is a way to reclaim my own destiny. I cling to that hope, a fragile thread in the vast tapestry of my despair. For even in the darkest of nights, there is always the possibility of dawn. The days that followed were a blur of nightmares and hallucinations. The boundaries between reality and fantasy dissolved, leaving me lost in a labyrinth of my own making. I saw his face everywhere, lurking in the shadows, his cold eyes watching me, his predatory smile mocking my despair. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was all in my head. But the fear was a constant companion, a relentless tide that swept away my sanity. I couldn't sleep, the night hours filled with visions of the abyss, the cold touch of his hand, the echoing laughter that reverberated through my bones. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking threat, every whisper a harbinger of doom. I tried to reach out for help, to tell someone what had happened. But my words came out garbled, my voice lost in a torrent of fear. They looked at me, their eyes filled with concern, but they didn't understand. They thought I was crazy, a victim of my own imagination. I was alone. Trapped in my own horror, I drifted further into the abyss, my grip on reality slipping away with each passing day. I became a prisoner in my own mind, my thoughts a swirling vortex of fear and paranoia. The world outside my window seemed to fade, replaced by a kaleidoscope of shadows and whispers. I retreated into myself, isolating myself from the world, afraid of what I might see, afraid of who I might become. I began to see patterns in everything, signs and symbols that whispered secrets to my tormented mind. The birdsong outside my window seemed to be a warning, the wind howling through the trees a lament for my lost soul. The fear was a constant, oppressive presence, a weight that crushed me from within. It consumed me, draining my will to live, my desire to fight. In the depths of my despair, I found myself drawn back to the park. I knew it was a foolish, reckless act, but I couldn't resist the pull, the desperate hope that I could somehow undo what I had done. The park was empty, the benches deserted, the trees silent. The air was still and cold, the leaves crunching under my feet a grim reminder of the season. I stood beneath the giant oak, the place where I had first seen him, the place where my life had taken a terrifying turn. I felt his presence, a chilling aura that seemed to emanate from the ancient tree, from the very ground beneath my feet. He was here, I knew it. He was watching me. Then I heard him, his voice a whisper in the wind, a chilling melody that seemed to permeate my very soul. "You have returned," he said, his voice a hollow echo, the sound of decay and despair. "You have come to accept your fate." He appeared before me, his face a mask of malevolent delight. His eyes bored into me, cold and predatory, a reflection of my own terror. "You cannot escape me," he hissed, his voice dripping with a chilling power that sent a wave of fear crashing over me. "You are mine." He reached out and grasped my hand, his touch cold and clammy, a searing pain that ran through my veins. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but I was frozen in place, my body paralyzed by a fear that had become a part of my very being. He pulled me towards the chasm, the abyss of darkness that called to me with an insatiable hunger. "No!" I cried, my voice a desperate plea lost in the swirling darkness. I struggled, I fought, but my efforts were futile. He was too strong, his power too great. He pushed me towards the precipice. I felt the pull, the inexorable force that pulled me towards the edge. "It's over," he whispered, his voice a chilling lullaby that promised only oblivion. "You are mine now." As I fell, I closed my eyes, the darkness engulfing me, the shadows closing in. My life flashed before me, a kaleidoscope of memories, a brief flicker of light in the encroaching darkness. And then I saw it. A single ray of light, piercing through the darkness, an unexpected beacon of hope. It was a small light, a fragile flame, but it burned with an intensity that defied the surrounding darkness. It was a light that radiated from within me, a light that whispered of resilience, of hope, of the fight that still lingered in my heart. It was a light that I had almost forgotten, a light that had been obscured by the darkness, but that had never truly extinguished. I reached for it, for the strength it offered, for the courage it whispered. I clung to it, a desperate plea for salvation. As I hurtled towards the abyss, I summoned every ounce of strength I had left. I ripped free from his grasp, my body twisting and turning in the air. Then I did something I never thought possible. I flew. I soared above the chasm, my body propelled by an unseen force, a power that surged through my veins, defying the laws of gravity. I flew towards the light, my heart pounding with a newfound hope. I broke free from the darkness, leaving the abyss behind me. The world around me shimmered, the shadows dissipating, the whispers fading. The colors returned, the sounds of the world rushing back to me. I was no longer in the park. I was back in the world I had left behind, the world I had almost forgotten. I was free. I stood there, my heart racing, my breath ragged, my body trembling. I was alive. I had escaped. I looked up at the sky, the pale sunlight filtering through the branches of the ancient oak. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with a new sense of life. I had seen something I wasn't meant to see. I had faced the consequences. But I had survived. And I had learned something. I had learned that even in the darkest of nights, even in the face of the most terrifying of fears, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of a light, a fragile flame that can burn even in the darkest of abysses. I had seen the darkness, the depths of fear and despair. But I had also seen the light, the glimmer of hope that resides within us all. And I had learned that even in the most terrifying of situations, there is always a choice. There is always the choice to fight, to resist, to reclaim our own destiny. I may be changed, forever marked by the shadows of my past. But I am not broken. I am still here. And I will survive. My new apartment, a charming one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brownstone, was a haven amidst the chaos. It was small, but the sunlight streaming through the large bay windows painted the space with warmth, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee in the morning filled the air with a cozy comfort. It was a Thursday, a little over a week since I had moved in, that the leaky faucet in the kitchen became a source of stress. The constant drip, drip, drip was like a persistent annoyance, a nagging reminder of unfinished business. I was determined to fix it, and with a quick search online, I found a local handyman service with rave reviews. I booked an appointment for the following day, feeling a pang of excitement at the thought of a functional kitchen sink again. The next day, the doorbell chimed at precisely 10 a.m. I answered to find a man in his late 50s, his face creased with the kind of lines that spoke of years spent working outdoors. He wore a faded blue work shirt, stained with grime, and a pair of worn-out jeans. He introduced himself as Michael, his voice gruff but pleasant. He carried a toolkit, its contents glinting under the sun streaming through the window. "So, you're here for the leaky faucet?" I said, feeling my pulse quicken with a mixture of relief and anticipation. Michael nodded, a smile creasing his weathered face. "That's right. I'm Michael. What's your name?" "Amelia," I replied. "It's nice to meet you." He grunted in response, his eyes flickering to my face for a brief moment before he turned his attention to the sink. He set up his tools, the familiar clanging sounds oddly comforting in the otherwise quiet space. He worked diligently, his movements fluid and practiced. I sat at the kitchen table, watching him work, my mind filled with thoughts of the countless other things I needed to do to settle into my new home. The hours drifted by, each one marked by the steady ticking of the clock on the wall and the rhythmic hammering of Michael's tools. I offered him tea, but he declined, muttering something about keeping busy. His focus remained intense, his gaze constantly flitting back and forth from his work to the various nooks and crannies of the kitchen. It was unsettling, a persistent feeling of being watched that I couldn't shake. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, the uneasy feeling in my gut intensified. Michael had finally finished fixing the faucet, but instead of packing up his tools and leaving, he lingered, his gaze fixed on a spot on the wall behind me. He was humming under his breath, a low, monotonous tune that sent shivers down my spine. "Well, there you have it," he said, his voice tight, almost strained. "The faucet's fixed. You shouldn't have any more trouble with that." "That's great," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I felt an overwhelming urge to flee. He surveyed the kitchen, his eyes raking over every inch of the space. It was more than just an inspection, it felt like a predatory scan, like a wolf sizing up its prey. "So," he said, his gaze lingering on me, "tell me about yourself, Amelia." His question was unexpected, the sudden shift in demeanor jarring. I felt a prickle of fear, my instinct screaming at me to get away. I just moved here," I stammered, trying to sound casual. "I'm still settling in." He let out a low chuckle, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the kitchen, a chilling echo of the unease gnawing at me. He took a step closer, his shadow stretching long and ominous over the floor. "I like settling in," he said, his voice a low whisper. "It's fun to see how people live." He stepped closer still, closing the distance between us. I could smell the faint scent of sweat and stale cigarette smoke on him, and a shiver ran down my spine. "You know, Amelia," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "I've always been fascinated by people. How they live, what they do. It's like a puzzle, figuring them out. His words were laced with a chilling intimacy, his gaze burning into me. I felt trapped, a captive in my own home. "Well, I'm going to get back to work now," he said, his smile predatory. "And you can tell me all about your life later." He turned away, his gaze lingering on the sink before he disappeared into a hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. I sat there, petrified, my body trembling, my mind racing. I knew I had to get out of there. The phone on the kitchen counter seemed miles away, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness of my fear. I fumbled for it, my fingers shaking. I had to call someone. I needed help. "Hey, Sarah," I whispered into the phone, my voice trembling. "I need you to come over. Now. It's important." I hung up, the click of the call ending a silent prayer. I couldn't wait for Michael to return. He was dangerous, and I was alone. Sarah arrived in less than 10 minutes, her face etched with worry. I told her everything, the unsettling feeling, the strange behavior, the way he lingered, his words echoing with an unnerving intimacy. Sarah, ever the pragmatic one, brushed it off as a harmless eccentricity. "Maybe he just likes to chat," she said, her voice soothing. "Don't worry so much. He's a professional. He's probably just trying to be friendly." But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. My gut screamed at me, and my intuition, usually a gentle whisper, now roared with a primal urgency. I knew something was wrong. "Just stay with me," I pleaded, my voice a desperate plea. "I don't feel comfortable being alone." Sarah relented, her worried gaze fixed on me. We sat in the living room, the silence broken only by the rhythmic hum of the city outside. We talked, trying to distract ourselves, but the weight of unease hung heavy in the air. As the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing at the hallway, my heart pounding with every creak or groan of the old building. Then, the doorbell chimed. My throat went dry, my eyes wide with panic. "It's probably him," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sarah stood up, her hand resting on the doorknob. I knew she wanted to confront him, to prove he was harmless, but I held her back. "Don't answer it, Sarah," I pleaded, my voice a desperate croak. "Just stay here." The doorbell rang again, insistent and relentless. Sarah hesitated, her face a mix of fear and determination. "Look, Amelia," she said, her voice firm. "If it's just a harmless misunderstanding, then there's no reason to be scared. But if it's anything else, we'll call the police." I knew she was right, but fear knotted my stomach. I couldn't bring myself to answer the door. Suddenly, the doorbell stopped. Silence descended, thick and oppressive. I held my breath, listening intently. I could hear the sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway, fading into the background noise of the city. Relief washed over me, a tidal wave of gratitude for Sarah's presence. I collapsed back onto the couch, my legs trembling. I had just survived a terrifying encounter, but the threat wasn't over. Michael was still out there, and I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of unease and suspicion. I avoided the kitchen, the leaky faucet a constant reminder of the unsettling encounter. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that Michael was just a harmless eccentric, but the feeling of being watched never left me. One evening, the familiar feeling of dread returned, an icy tendril of fear coiling around my stomach. I was in the living room, reading a book, when a faint noise from the kitchen caught my attention. It was a soft click, almost imperceptible, like the gentle hum of a refrigerator. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I crept towards the kitchen, my heart pounding against my ribs. My senses were heightened, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the silence. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, my fingers tightening around it. It felt cold under my touch, like a dead man's hand. I pushed the door open, the kitchen bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. I held my breath, my eyes scanning the room, searching for the source of the click. Then I saw it. Under the sink, nestled amongst the pipes and wires, was a small black camera. It was barely visible, camouflaged by the shadows, but its presence was unmistakably sinister. My blood ran cold. A wave of nausea washed over me, a primal fear gripping me in its icy embrace. I was being watched, not just by Michael, but by this insidious device, recording my every move, capturing my most intimate moments. He had been right. He was fascinated by people. But it wasn't just their personalities he was interested in. He wanted to possess them, to see them in their most vulnerable state, stripped bare, exposed. The camera was a twisted trophy, a testament to his perverse obsession. It was a violation of my privacy, my sense of security, my basic right to be alone. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me, fueling a desperate need to act. I needed to tell someone who could help me. I rushed to the phone, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. I called the police, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. I told them everything: the leaky faucet, the strange behavior, the camera. My story was a jumbled mess of emotions, my voice cracking with fear and anger. I spoke of my suspicions, my intuition, my growing sense of dread, and finally, the terrifying discovery of the hidden camera. The officer on the other end of the line listened patiently, his voice calm and reassuring. He assured me that they would investigate, that I was safe, that justice would be served. That night, the police arrived at my apartment, 2 officers in uniform, their faces hardened by 1,000 encounters with the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of humanity. They questioned me, listened intently to my story, and examined the camera. Later, after they left, I felt a mixture of relief and a chilling sense of dread. I had been watched, filmed, captured in a way I never could have imagined. My home, a sanctuary, had been infiltrated, my privacy violated. It was a betrayal of trust, a violation of the most basic human right, the right to be safe and secure in one's own space. The police investigation revealed a terrifying truth. Michael, the friendly handyman, was not just a harmless eccentric. He was a predator, a stalker who preyed on the vulnerabilities of vulnerable tenants. He had installed cameras in dozens of apartments, recording their lives without their knowledge. He was a voyeur, a manipulator, a predator who found perverse pleasure in watching the private lives of innocent people. He was apprehended, arrested, and charged with multiple counts of invasion of privacy. His case became a local news sensation, a cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting strangers, of letting them into our homes and lives. For me, the experience was a nightmare that would haunt me forever. The fear of being watched, the violation of my privacy, the knowledge that my most private moments had been captured on camera, was a burden I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I moved out of the apartment soon after, the memory of that night etched in my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of society. I moved to a different neighborhood, a new city, a place where I could start fresh, where I could begin to rebuild my sense of security and trust. But even now, years later, the feeling of being watched never fully disappears. It lingers in the shadows, a constant reminder of the man who invaded my home, my life, and my sense of safety. The city still holds a certain allure for me, a sense of excitement and vibrancy that I can't deny. But it also carries a chilling undercurrent, a reminder that beneath the surface of this bustling metropolis, the darkness always lurks, waiting for its chance to strike. And I, like every other inhabitant of this vast urban jungle, am forever on guard. It's been years since I left that apartment, but the echo of Michael's chilling words still lingers in my mind. I like settling in. It's fun to see how people live. Those words, laced with a sinister undertone, became a haunting reminder of the fragility of privacy, the illusion of safety in a world where the line between normalcy and deviance can be blurred. I have a new apartment now, a different city, a fresh start. But the experience has changed me. It has made me more cautious, more aware of the world around me. I'm no longer the naive young woman who thought she could trust the world. I've learned that trust must be earned, that appearances can be deceiving, and that the darkest corners of humanity can lurk in the most unexpected places. My wife, Emily, and I nestled in the warmth of our shared evening, the gentle glow of the television casting a soft ambience upon our living room. The soft crackling of the fireplace harmonized with the distant hum of the refrigerator, composing a symphony of domestic bliss. Suddenly, the phone's shrill ring shattered the serene tapestry of our evening, jolting us from our reverie. A cold shiver slithered down my spine as Emily extended her trembling hand towards the receiver. A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the insistent ringing. "Hello," Emily uttered, her voice a mere whisper etched with trepidation. A raspy, unfamiliar voice met her ears, sending a surge of ice through our veins. "Is this Emily and Ethan?" Emily's fingers tightened around the receiver, her knuckles turning white. "Yes, this is Emily." "Who's calling?" The voice paused, as if savoring the moment. "I'm an old friend. I've been watching you for a long time." A chill coursed through my body. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the silence. A low chuckle echoed through the line. "You should know me, Ethan. We have a complicated history." My mind raced, frantically searching through the labyrinth of my past for any semblance of recognition. "I don't know who you are," I lied, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Oh, but you do," the voice insisted. "You may have buried the memory, but I assure you, it's still there, lurking in the darkest corners of your mind." Emily's gasp cut through the tension. "We don't know you," she declared, her voice trembling. "Leave us alone." The voice let out a sinister laugh. "You can't escape me, Emily. I've come for you, and for Ethan." Fear gnawed at my core as I realized the gravity of our situation. This was no ordinary prank. This was a predator, toying with us like mice in a cat's deadly game. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice a mere croak. "Revenge," the voice hissed. "For what you did to me." Emily's eyes widened in horror. "We didn't do anything to you," the voice cackled. "Oh, but you did. You ruined my life. You made me an outcast. And now, it's your turn to pay." As the phone line went dead, a deafening silence descended upon our home, broken only by the frantic beating of our hearts. Emily stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, her face a mask of pure dread. "What did we do?" she whispered. I shook my head, my mind reeling. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whoever that was, they believe we wronged them." Fear gnawed at me, whispering doubts and uncertainties. Had we inadvertently hurt someone in our past? Was this a case of mistaken identity, or was there a darker truth lurking beneath the surface? As the night wore on, sleep eluded us. We lay awake, tormented by the chilling words of our unknown tormentor. Emily clung to me, her body trembling with fear. I held her close, trying to shield her from the unseen horrors that lurked in our past. The next day, we called the police, hoping they could shed some light on our nightmare. They took our report but were skeptical of our story. Without any evidence to support our claim, they couldn't do much. Fear cast a dark shadow over our lives. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, afraid of what might come next. The phone became a harbinger of doom, a constant reminder of our tormentor's sinister promise. Days turned into nights as we struggled to cope with the relentless terror that consumed us. Our once serene home had become a prison, the walls closing in on us with each passing hour. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily and I delved into our past, searching for any clue that could lead us to our unknown enemy. We combed through old photos, pored over yearbooks, and reached out to former friends and acquaintances. Slowly but surely, a chilling pattern began to emerge. There had been rumors, whispers of a cruel and vindictive individual who had been wronged many years ago. As we pieced together the fragmented memories, a name finally emerged: Sarah. Sarah had been a classmate of ours in high school. She had been a shy and withdrawn girl, often the target of our thoughtless and cruel jokes. Emily and I had never been directly involved in the bullying, but we had witnessed it and done nothing to stop it. Overwhelmed by guilt and shame, we realized the devastating consequences of our past actions. Sarah had never forgotten the pain we had inflicted upon her. And now, years later, she had returned to exact her revenge. Armed with this newfound knowledge, we confronted Sarah, hoping to reason with her and apologize for our past behavior. But she was beyond reason, consumed by an unyielding thirst for retribution. Our pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears as Sarah revealed her sinister plan. She had been manipulating our lives from the shadows, orchestrating a series of seemingly unrelated events that had led us to this moment. And now, she was ready to deliver the final blow. With trembling hands, she produced a small, silver box. "This contains a deadly poison," she hissed. "One drop will end your lives in an instant." Fear paralyzed us as she placed the box on the table, a ticking time bomb threatening to shatter our fragile existence. Emily's eyes met mine, reflecting the depth of our despair. In that moment, I realized that our past had come back to haunt us with a vengeance. The consequences of our long-forgotten actions had finally caught up to us, and we were powerless to stop them. As darkness enveloped our once bright world, I felt a profound sense of regret and remorse. We had allowed our youthful ignorance and cruelty to destroy not only our present but also our future. And now, we were paying the ultimate price. The weight of my colossal blunder settled upon me like a suffocating cloak, casting a long shadow over what should have been the most cherished day of our lives, our wedding anniversary. In the tapestry of our marriage, this anniversary was supposed to be an exquisite masterpiece, a vibrant celebration of love and companionship. Instead, I had clumsily brushed against the canvas with the clumsy hand of a novice, smudging the delicate hues and leaving behind a grotesque blotch of despair. My wife, Amelia, had always dreamed of celebrating our anniversary in a quaint cottage nestled amidst the rolling hills of Tuscany. The idyllic setting, with its gentle breeze carrying the heady scent of blooming lavender, would provide the perfect backdrop for a romantic getaway. Months in advance, I had meticulously planned every detail, determined to make this anniversary an unforgettable experience. I had booked a secluded cottage with a panoramic view of the Tuscan countryside, complete with a cozy fireplace and a private balcony overlooking the vineyards. I had carefully selected a menu featuring Amelia's favorite dishes, arranged for a private wine tasting at a local vineyard, and booked a couple's massage to ease away any lingering stress. I had even purchased a stunning diamond necklace, knowing how much she adored jewelry. However, as fate would have it, my well-laid plans began to unravel like a cheap sweater. The morning of our departure, I realized with horror that I had left the tickets for the flight at home. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched every nook and cranny of our apartment, but the tickets were nowhere to be found. In a moment of desperation, I called the airline, only to be informed that there were no other flights available that day. My heart sank as I broke the devastating news to Amelia. A wave of disappointment washed over her face, but she bravely put on a smile and said, "It's okay, honey. We can always celebrate another time." In an attempt to salvage the situation, I suggested we explore the beautiful countryside by car. Perhaps we could still find a charming bed and breakfast and make the best of the day. As we drove through the rolling hills, the Tuscan landscape unfolded before us like a breathtaking painting. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting a golden glow on the vineyards and olive groves. However, our tranquil drive was short-lived. As we rounded a bend, we came across a group of cyclists blocking the road. They were arguing heatedly, their voices growing louder as the situation escalated. Just as I began to maneuver our car around the cyclists, one of them stumbled and fell directly into our path. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car screeched to a halt, and the sickening sound of metal crumpling filled the air. Amelia and I were thrown forward with such force that it felt like our bodies were being ripped apart. The airbags deployed, but the impact had clearly taken its toll. As I regained consciousness, a wave of pain crashed over me. My head was pounding, and my limbs felt like they had been shattered. I looked around frantically, searching for Amelia. She was slumped over in the passenger seat, her face bloodied and her breathing shallow. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of our situation. Summoning every ounce of strength, I unbuckled my seatbelt and stumbled out of the car. I frantically checked Amelia's pulse and found that it was still beating, but weak. I looked around for help, but the road was deserted. The cyclists had disappeared, and there was not a single soul in sight. Fear gnawed at me as I realized that we were stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no way to contact emergency services. The sun was beginning to set, casting an eerie glow on the surroundings. As darkness enveloped us, the temperature plummeted. Amelia's shivering body pressed against mine, and I desperately tried to keep her warm. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from the nearby woods. It was a faint rustling sound, like something was moving through the undergrowth. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Amelia," I whispered, "do you hear that?" She nodded weakly, her eyes wide with fear. The rustling sound grew louder, and then I saw it, a pair of glowing red eyes staring at us from the shadows. I felt a surge of primal terror as I realized that we were being watched. Whatever it was in the darkness, it was getting closer. I could hear its heavy footsteps crunching through the leaves. "Amelia," I said, my voice trembling, "we have to hide." I helped Amelia out of the car and into the nearby woods. We stumbled through the dense undergrowth, thorns and branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, I could hear the creature getting closer. Its heavy breathing sent shivers down my spine. We ran blindly through the darkness, not knowing where we were going or what was ahead. Fear propelled us forward, our legs burning with exhaustion. Finally, we stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center was a dilapidated cabin, its windows boarded up and its roof caved in. "In there," I gasped, pointing to the cabin. We ran towards the cabin and stumbled inside. I fumbled for a light switch, but there was no electricity. We were plunged into complete darkness. I could hear the creature outside, circling the cabin. Its heavy footsteps echoed through the silence, sending shivers down my spine. I huddled close to Amelia, trying to comfort her. But our solace was short-lived. Suddenly, the cabin door creaked open, and a cold wind blew through the room. I could feel the creature's presence, its fetid breath on my neck. Terror consumed me as I realized that there was no escape. The creature had found us, and it was only a matter of time before it would strike. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature let out a piercing scream, a sound so blood-curdling that it shook the cabin to its core. I opened my eyes and saw a bright light coming from the doorway. The creature recoiled from the light, its eyes burning with pain. It stumbled backward, disappearing into the darkness. We were saved. Amelia and I embraced each other, tears streaming down our faces. We had somehow survived the night, but the memory of the creature would forever haunt our dreams. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the boarded-up windows, we stumbled out of the cabin and made our way back to our car. The cyclists had returned to retrieve their bikes, and they called for help. We were taken to a nearby hospital, where we received treatment for our injuries. Amelia had a broken arm, and I had a severe concussion. But we were alive, and that was all that mattered. Our anniversary had been a disaster, but it had also been a profound turning point in our lives. We had faced our fears together, and we had emerged stronger than ever before. In the years that followed, we often returned to the site of the accident. We would sit in the clearing where the cabin once stood and remember the night we faced our greatest terror. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. And that love can conquer all, even the most unspeakable horrors. My slumber was abruptly shattered by a relentless ringing at my doorstep. I groggily stumbled out of bed and peered through the peephole, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing on my doorstep was my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy. Normally a sweet and unassuming woman, there was something unsettling about her appearance that night. Her eyes held an odd gleam, and her lips curled into a disturbingly wide smile. Her hands were hidden behind her back, as if she were concealing something. Hesitantly, I cracked open the door, a wave of unease washing over me. "Mrs. Dorothy," I uttered, my voice trembling, "what are you doing here so late?" Her smile widened, but it held no hint of warmth or familiarity. "Why, hello there, dear," she chirped in an unnaturally high-pitched voice. "I just wanted to check on you. I heard some strange noises coming from your apartment." My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. I had heard no such noises, and Mrs. Dorothy had never expressed any concern about my well-being before. "I'm fine, Mrs. Dorothy," I reassured her. "There's no need to worry." But she simply stood there, her smile unwavering, her eyes boring into mine. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the true nature of her visit. She wasn't here to help. She was here for something else, something sinister. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold indifference. "You know what I want," she hissed. "You've been keeping it from me for far too long." Fear gripped me like a vice as the realization dawned on me. Mrs. Dorothy was not the harmless old woman I had always known. She was something else. Something that had been watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Panic surged through my veins as I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. But I knew it was no use. The creature outside would not be deterred. I stumbled backwards, my eyes darting around the room, searching for something, anything, that could protect me from the horror that lurked outside my door. My gaze fell on the antique silver cross that hung above the fireplace. It had been passed down through my family for generations, said to possess the power to ward off evil. With desperate hands I snatched the cross from the wall and held it high. "Begone!" I shouted, my voice filled with both fear and newfound resolve. "In the name of all that is holy, I command you to leave!" To my astonishment, the creature let out a piercing wail and recoiled from the cross. It clawed at the door, its sharp talons tearing at the wood, but it could not enter. With each passing moment, the wail grew fainter, the creature's desperation waning. Finally, it stopped altogether, and the silence returned. Trembling with both fear and relief, I collapsed onto the floor, the cross still clutched tightly in my hand. I had survived the night, but I knew my ordeal was far from over. The creature would be back, and I had to be prepared. As the sun rose, casting a pale glow over the room, I realized the true extent of the danger I was in. Mrs. Dorothy was not the only one. There were others like her, lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting for their chance to strike. I knew I had to leave, to escape the clutches of the darkness that had enveloped my life. But where could I go? Who could I trust? In the days and weeks that followed, I became a wanderer, constantly moving, never staying in one place for too long. I avoided contact with others, fearing that they too might be corrupted by the evil that pursued me. But despite my efforts, the creatures always found me. They would appear in my dreams, their cold eyes watching me, their sharp talons reaching for me. I could never fully escape their grasp. One night, as I lay huddled in a cold, dark alley, I felt the familiar presence of the creatures closing in. I knew it was only a matter of time before they would take me. But this time, I was prepared. I had spent countless hours studying the ancient texts that spoke of the creatures and their weaknesses. I knew that they feared the power of holy relics. With trembling hands I reached into my pocket and withdrew the silver cross that had protected me on that fateful night. I held it high, the words of the exorcism ritual flowing from my lips. To my surprise, the creatures recoiled once again, their wails echoing through the alley. They clawed at the ground, their bodies writhing in agony. As the sun began to rise, the creatures vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. I had defeated them, at least for now. But I knew they would be back. I continued to wander, my life a constant struggle to stay one step ahead of the creatures. But I never gave up hope. I knew that there was a way to end this nightmare, to free myself from the clutches of darkness. And so, I pressed on, my faith in the power of good my only guide. It was Friday night, the air thick with anticipation for the weekend. My mom worked the 3 to 11 shift, and by this time, she'd be making her way home from the supermarket, her arms laden with groceries. We had a routine. She'd call to let me know she was on her way, and I'd go wait by the front door, ready to help carry in the bags. It was a simple, ordinary thing, but it felt comforting, anchoring us in the predictable rhythm of our lives. The familiar ring of the house phone startled me out of my gaming trance. I winced, the jarring noise a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the console. It was my mom, her voice a mix of tired relief and eagerness. "I'm almost home, honey. Can you come help me with the groceries?" I nodded, feeling a familiar warmth spread through me. There was something comforting about knowing my mom was coming home, her presence a tangible anchor in the shifting sands of my teenage world. I switched off the console and headed for the front door, the echo of the phone call fading into the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. As I stood waiting by the front door, the kitchen light reflecting off the hallway mirror, I noticed something odd. In the reflection, behind me, stood a woman. I couldn't place her face. She wasn't anyone I knew. Her gaze was fixed on me, a steely intensity in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than 5 seconds before she turned and disappeared into the hallway leading to my bedroom. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic tattoo against my ribs. I spun around, scanning the hallway, but it was empty. The woman was gone. My breath hitched, catching in my throat. A wave of unease washed over me, a sense of something amiss, something sinister lurking just beyond my perception. The sound of my mom's car pulling into the driveway broke through the haze of confusion that had settled over me. I hurried to the door, flinging it open before she even had a chance to park. "Mom," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you see a woman in the house?" She was standing in the hallway, looking at me. My mom's weary smile faltered as she took in my frantic expression. "A woman? In the house? Honey, you must be mistaken. It's just you and me here." "But I saw her, Mom," I insisted, my voice raising in a desperate plea for understanding. "She was right there, in the hallway, staring at me. She disappeared into my room." My mom sighed, the lines around her eyes deepening with worry. "It's probably just your grandmother, sweetie. She's been feeling a bit down lately, and she likes to wander around the house. Don't worry about it." "My grandmother?" I echoed, feeling a wave of nausea rise in my throat. My grandmother had passed away years ago, a fact that was etched into my memory like a permanent scar. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this woman was not my grandmother. "Yes, your grandmother," my mom said, a reassuring tone in her voice. "She's been coming around more lately, trying to find ways to be close to us." I stared at my mother, my mind struggling to grasp the absurdity of her words. "Mom, my grandmother is dead." "I know that, she's dead." "Oh, honey," my mom said, her voice tinged with the familiar mixture of weariness and exasperation. "It's just your grief talking, you're imagining things. Come on, help me with the groceries before they get warm." I stood there, frozen in place, the weight of my fear pressing down on me like a physical force. I wanted to believe my mom, to accept her explanation, but the image of that woman, her steely gaze burning into me, was too vivid to ignore. A cold knot of fear twisted in my stomach, a primal instinct screaming at me to flee, to escape the suffocating weight of the unknown. I forced myself to move, my legs feeling leaden, my steps unsure. As I helped my mom carry the bags inside, the fear I felt only intensified. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the window, felt like a premonition of something terrible, something inevitable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something unseen was lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and denial. I tried to convince myself that I had simply imagined the woman, that my grief for my grandmother had manifested itself in a distorted vision. I spent hours playing video games, seeking refuge in the familiar comforts of the virtual world, desperate to escape the whispers of fear that haunted my waking hours. But the fear persisted, clinging to me like a shadow, growing darker and more suffocating with each passing day. I couldn't sleep, the image of the woman's face flashing before my eyes every time I closed them. I couldn't concentrate, every sound in the house triggering a surge of panic. One afternoon, I was home alone, my mom working her afternoon shift. I was cleaning my room, trying to distract myself from the growing sense of dread that gnawed at my edges. As I was putting away some clothes, I noticed something out of place. It was a small, faded photograph tucked behind a book on my bookshelf, a picture I had never seen before. The photo depicted a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes strangely empty. An unsettling familiarity clung to the image, a sense of recognition that I couldn't quite place. I picked up the photograph, my fingers trembling slightly. I stared at the woman's face, the uncanny resemblance to the woman I had seen in the hallway sending chills down my spine. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I lay awake, the image of the woman in the photo imprinted onto my mind. The fear was palpable, a living entity that suffocated the air around me. Unable to bear the silence any longer, I decided to call my mom. The line buzzed, ringing unanswered. My stomach lurched, a wave of panic washing over me. I called again, and again, the same unnerving silence greeting each attempt. A cold dread seeped into my bones, the fear finally reaching its crescendo. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. I grabbed the photograph, clutching it in my hand as I raced out of the house, the fear propelling me forward. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away, to find help. The streets were deserted, the air thick with the oppressive silence of the night. I ran, my breath catching in my throat, my legs burning with fatigue, but the fear fueled my every step. I didn't know how long I had been running when I stumbled upon a small diner, its neon sign casting a sickly yellow glow onto the deserted street. The door creaked open as I entered, the warmth of the diner a stark contrast to the chill of the night air. I collapsed onto a stool at the counter, my body shaking uncontrollably. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, looked at me with concern. I tried to speak, but only a choked sob escaped my lips. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, her voice soft and soothing. I shook my head, unable to form words. I thrust the photograph into her hand, the fear in my eyes speaking volumes. The waitress looked at the photograph, her expression changing from concern to alarm. She took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Honey, you need to stay here. I'll call the police." I nodded, the tears finally spilling over, the dam of fear finally breaking. As the waitress dialed the phone, I tried to explain what had happened, my voice trembling, my words jumbled and incoherent. The woman in the photo, the woman I had seen in the hallway, the woman who had haunted my dreams, she wasn't just an apparition, a figment of my imagination. She was real. She was here, and she was looking for me. The blue and red lights of the police car pierced through the darkness, their arrival a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness of my fear. The police officers took my statement, their expressions grim, their eyes reflecting the weight of the unsettling truth. The investigation was long and arduous. The police questioned my mom repeatedly, but she insisted that I was mistaken, that she had never seen the woman in the photo, that my grandmother's death had triggered a deep-seated anxiety that manifested itself in hallucinations. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the officers agreed to keep the case open, their suspicion growing with each passing day. They even managed to trace the photograph to a local antique shop, but the shopkeeper had no memory of selling the photo or even having it in his inventory. The mystery continued to deepen, the truth hidden behind a veil of shadows, a silent terror that whispered in the darkness. I knew, with a gnawing certainty, that the woman in the photo was real, that she was somehow connected to my family, and that she was not leaving me alone until she had achieved whatever purpose she had set for herself. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the investigation grew cold, the trail going dead. The fear lingered though, a constant companion, a whispered threat that hung in the air, a chilling reminder that the world was not as safe as I had always believed. I moved out of my childhood home, the memories of that night forever etched onto my soul. The fear never left me, but it softened over time, morphing into an uneasy suspicion, a nagging doubt about the nature of reality, the porousness of the veil between what we see and what might be lurking just beyond our perception. I never forgot the woman in the photograph, the woman who had haunted my dreams, the woman who had shown me that the world could hold both beauty and darkness, the familiar and the unimaginable, all intertwined in a complex tapestry of life and death. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I would catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, A fleeting image of a woman, her eyes intense, her gaze fixed on me, a reminder that the line between reality and fantasy could be thin, fragile, and easily crossed. The woman in the photo became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder of the unfathomable mysteries that lay hidden beneath the surface of our everyday lives. As the clock struck midnight, I found myself walking through the neon-drenched streets of a seedy part of town. The night air hung heavy with the scent of rotten garbage and the sour stench of cheap liquor. Visions danced before my eyes, distorting the shapes and shadows of the world around me. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural intensity, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Need some help?" the figure hissed. Terror seized me as I realized the figure was not of this world. Its skin was pale and translucent, revealing the intricate network of veins beneath the surface. Its body was adorned with gruesome scars and open wounds. Frozen in place, I watched in horror as the figure reached out a clawed hand. Its touch sent a shiver down my spine as it gripped my arm. A surge of electricity coursed through my body, paralyzing me with fear. As the figure dragged me towards a decrepit alleyway, my mind raced with thoughts of escape. But my limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. I knew I was doomed. The alleyway was a labyrinth of shadows and discarded rubbish. The walls were stained with blood and grime, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. As the figure dragged me deeper into the darkness, I could hear the faint sound of dripping water echoing from the walls. Suddenly, I was thrown into a cold, damp room. The stench of old urine and rotting flesh permeated the air. I looked around in disbelief, my eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. As my vision cleared, I realized I was surrounded by disfigured bodies. Some were hanging from the ceiling, their faces twisted in agony. Others lay sprawled on the floor, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. Blood and gore splattered the walls and floor, creating a macabre tapestry of horror. I struggled to my feet, my mind reeling from the grotesque sight before me. Panic surged through me as I realized that these were not corpses. They were still alive, their eyes wide with terror and their bodies contorted in pain. As I stumbled through the room, searching for an escape, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see the figure standing in the doorway. Its eyes burned with hatred, and its teeth were bared in a savage grin. In a swift motion, the figure lunged at me. Its claws raked across my face, leaving deep gashes that oozed blood. I screamed in agony as it tore into my flesh. Pain exploded in my body as the figure ripped out my eyes and devoured them before my very own senses. Darkness consumed me, and I collapsed to the floor, my body a broken and mangled wreck. As my consciousness faded, I could hear the figure laughing maniacally. Its laughter echoed through the room, a symphony of pure evil. I was doomed to live out my nightmare for eternity, trapped in a realm of unspeakable horrors. As the last vestiges of my sanity evaporated, I realized the true nature of my fate. I had descended into the abyss, where the horrors of the night would forever torment my soul. I remember the day I met my brother-in-law, David, vividly. He was charming, almost too charming, with a smile that never seemed to leave his face. He had a way of looking into your eyes with such intensity, it was unsettling, almost predatory. He was the perfect catch for my sister, Emily. My Emily, the girl who always saw the good in everyone, the girl who believed in fairy tales, had fallen head over heels for him. The wedding was beautiful. Emily, radiant in her white gown, beamed at David as he spoke his vows. He promised to cherish her, protect her, and love her forever. His words were so sincere, so heartfelt, that I, despite my initial reservations, felt a flicker of hope for their future. Soon after the wedding, Emily moved into David's family home. It was an old, sprawling Victorian mansion, shrouded in an air of mystery. There was a hushed silence that hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the creaks and groans of the ancient house. The family was, to put it mildly, eccentric. His mother, Eleanor, was a woman of rigid propriety, her face perpetually etched with a frown. She seemed to disapprove of everything, especially Emily. David's father, Edward, was a quiet, withdrawn man who spent most of his time tinkering with strange contraptions in his workshop. They had 2 other children, a son, Jasper, and a daughter, Cecily. Jasper was a brooding, silent young man with an unsettling gaze, and Cecily, a pale, ethereal girl who seemed to float through the house like a ghost. The first sign that something was amiss came a few weeks after the wedding. Emily called me, her voice strained. "Something's wrong, Sarah," she said. "David's different at night. He gets this look, a dark, almost angry look in his eyes." I brushed off her concerns, thinking it was just nerves. Then, the strange incidents began. A sudden chill would sweep through the house, leaving goosebumps on my skin. The pictures on the walls would shift, as if moved by unseen hands, and I'd hear hushed whispers coming from the attic. The sounds were unsettling, the whispers barely decipherable, but they always seemed to be about me, about Emily. One evening, while having dinner with the family, I noticed a cut on Jasper's hand. It was a deep, jagged wound, unlike anything that could have been caused by a simple accident. He didn't flinch when I looked at it, just stared at me with an unnerving calmness. "It's nothing," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. He seemed to be hiding something, but what? As the weeks turned into months, Emily grew thinner, her eyes hollowed out, her laughter replaced by a strained smile. She was constantly apologizing for David's behavior, his sudden outbursts of anger, his unsettlingly possessive nature. "He's just stressed," she'd say, but I knew better. One night, I found Emily in the attic, huddled in a corner, her face pale with fear. She was clutching a small, leather-bound journal. "Sarah, you have to see this," she whispered, her voice trembling. The journal was filled with David's writings, disturbing entries detailing his fascination with the occult, his experiments with dark magic, his plans for Emily. "He's not human, Sarah," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "He's something else." I felt a cold dread crawl up my spine. I was no stranger to the supernatural, but the things I read in that journal, the rituals, the sacrifices, the blood, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. I knew then that I had to get Emily out of that house, away from David and his family. I had to protect her, even if it meant facing the darkness that lurked within those walls. That night, I confronted David. "What have you done to her?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and fear. He just smiled, that unnervingly charming smile, and said, "You don't understand, Sarah. She's mine now. And she's going to be perfect." His words sent shivers down my spine. His eyes gleamed with a terrifying, almost animalistic hunger. I knew then that he wouldn't stop until he had broken her, until she was nothing but an empty shell, a puppet dancing to his tune. I spent the next few days frantically trying to find a way to get Emily out of the house. I contacted the authorities, but they dismissed my stories as the ramblings of a worried sister. No one believed me, not even Emily, who insisted that David was just misunderstood. Then I found a clue in the journal. There was a passage about a ritual, a sacrifice that would bind Emily to David, a ritual that would turn her into something monstrous. It was scheduled for the following night, under the full moon. I knew I had to act fast. I gathered everything I could carry, packed Emily's belongings, and waited for nightfall. I had no plan, no backup, just blind desperation driving me forward. As the full moon bathed the house in its silver light, I slipped into the mansion silently. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. I found Emily in the attic, tied to an altar covered in strange symbols. David was chanting in a guttural language, his eyes burning with an unholy light. I lunged at him, screaming, "Stop! Leave her alone!" He turned, his smile widening, a grotesque parody of his usual charm. "You're too late, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "She's mine now." Then the ritual began. David raised a silver knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight, and plunged it into Emily's chest. Her scream was filled with such pure, unadulterated terror that it echoed through the house, shaking the very walls. I watched in horror as Emily's body convulsed, her skin turning a sickly green, her eyes turning black, her nails growing into sharp, pointed claws. She looked like a creature from a nightmare, a grotesque mockery of the woman I knew and loved. David laughed, a chilling, unholy sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. "She's perfect, Sarah. She's finally mine." He turned to me, his eyes burning with an insane intensity. "Join us, Sarah. Become part of our family. We can all be together forever." I felt a surge of pure rage. I wouldn't let him win. I wouldn't let him turn my sister into a monster. I wouldn't let him destroy her. I took a step back, my eyes locking with his. I knew what I had to do. I had to fight, even though I knew I was outmatched, even though I knew I might not survive. I charged at him, screaming, grabbing the knife from his hand. The struggle was brutal, desperate. I slashed and kicked, my fury driving me forward. He finally broke free, his eyes filled with a mix of surprise and rage. He lunged at me, his claws outstretched, but I managed to dodge him. I backed away, my back against the wall, the flickering candlelight casting grotesque shadows around us. He was a beast, a creature of pure evil, but I was her sister. I would fight for her, even if it cost me my life. We battled for what felt like an eternity, blood splattering on the walls, our screams echoing through the silent house. Finally, in a moment of desperation, I grabbed a heavy candlestick and slammed it into the back of his head. He collapsed, his eyes glazed over, his body still twitching slightly. He was finally defeated, but the victory felt hollow. My sister, the woman I loved, was gone, replaced by a monstrous, corrupted shadow of her former self. I looked at Emily, her eyes black, her face contorted in a grimace. She was a prisoner of her own body, a broken shell controlled by a malevolent force. I knew I could never save her. I had failed her. With tears streaming down my face, I fled the house, leaving behind the horrifying scene, the blood, the screams, the darkness that had consumed my sister. I left the house that night, forever changed. The horrifying events, the gruesome details, the pure evil that I had witnessed, they haunted me, consumed my thoughts, turned my dreams into nightmares. I never saw Emily again. She was gone, swallowed by the darkness, a victim of David's twisted obsessions. I tried to move on, to find peace, but the memories, the blood, the screams, they were always there, a constant reminder of the evil that lurked beneath the surface of normalcy, the horrors that lay hidden in the shadows. The house still stands, a reminder of my sister's fate, a monument to the darkness that had consumed her. I drive past it sometimes, a cold dread settling in my stomach, a shiver running down my spine. I can almost see her, trapped within those walls, her eyes black, her face twisted in a horrifying grimace. And I know, deep down, that the darkness is not gone. It's still out there, waiting, watching, waiting for its next victim. As an avid traveler, I have always been drawn to exploring lesser-known and remote areas. It was during one of my solo trips to a small village in the mountains that I had an unforgettable encounter with a cannibalistic psycho freak killer. The village I stumbled upon was a small and isolated one, with minimal access to technology and modern amenities. The locals were friendly and welcoming, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that surrounded the place. Despite my instincts warning me to leave, I decided to stay for a few days and explore the natural beauty of the area. On my second day in the village, I met a peculiar man named Vincent. He was tall and lanky with a disturbingly vacant look in his eyes. He seemed friendly enough at first, offering to show me around the village and share local folklore with me. However, as we walked through the woods, his demeanor changed drastically. He started talking about his love for hunting and how he enjoyed the thrill of the chase. I tried to brush it off as a harmless hobby, but something about his words sent shivers down my spine. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as he talked about his prey, and how he would stalk them before making his move. I couldn't deny the fact that he gave off a sinister vibe. As we continued our walk, I noticed something odd about Vincent's home. There were bones scattered around his front yard, some of which seemed human. My heart started racing as I realized that I was in the presence of a potential cannibalistic killer. I wanted to leave immediately, but Vincent's grip on my arm tightened, and he started leading me towards his house. I mustered up all my courage and managed to break free from his grasp. I ran as fast as I could through the dense woods, not looking back until I reached the safety of the village. I reported Vincent to the local authorities, and they assured me that they would look into the matter. However, my nightmare was far from over. The next morning, while I was packing my bags to leave the village, I saw Vincent lurking outside my guest house. He had a crazed look in his eyes as he stared at me through the window. I knew I had to leave immediately. I managed to hitch a ride with a kind villager and made my way back to civilization. However, the terror of my encounter with Vincent stayed with me. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was following me, even though I was miles away from the village. Months went by, and I tried my best to forget about the incident and move on with my life. But one day, while browsing through the news, I came across a shocking headline. The police had arrested a man for multiple murders in the same village where I had encountered Vincent. As I read further, my heart sank as I saw Vincent's picture staring back at me. The details of his crimes were even more horrifying than I could have imagined. Vincent would lure unsuspecting travelers into the woods and hunt them down like animals before consuming their flesh. The bones scattered around his home were indeed human remains. My mind immediately went back to that fateful day when I narrowly escaped becoming one of Vincent's victims. It sent chills down my spine, thinking about how close I had come to being another statistic in his killing spree. The incident left a lasting impact on me, and I couldn't help but wonder what drove someone to become such a monstrous killer. Was it a mental illness? A traumatic past? Or was he simply born with an insatiable thirst for blood? My encounter with a cannibalistic psycho freak killer taught me an important lesson: always trust your instincts, especially when it comes to your safety. It also made me realize the fragility of life and how easily it can be taken away by someone with malicious intentions. As I write this blog, I can't help but shudder at the thought of what could have happened if I had not listened to my gut feeling. My encounter with Vincent will always be etched in my memory as a reminder to never let my guard down, no matter how friendly or harmless someone may seem. My heart raced as I sat in the dimly lit room, my hands trembling with fear. I couldn't believe what I had just discovered. My boyfriend, the man I loved and trusted, was a psycho killer. It all started when I met him 3 years ago at a local coffee shop. He was charming, charismatic, and had a smile that could light up a room. We hit it off instantly, and before I knew it, we were in a serious relationship. Everything seemed perfect, until strange things started happening. At first, it was just small things like him getting angry over little things or making odd comments. I brushed it off as stress from work and the honeymoon phase of our relationship coming to an end. But as time went on, his behavior became more and more concerning. He would have outbursts of anger for no reason, he would disappear for hours without any explanation, and he would often make unsettling comments about wanting to hurt people. I tried to talk to him about his behavior, but he would always deflect and make excuses. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells around him, never knowing what would set him off. Yet I loved him and believed that underneath all of this, he was still the man I fell in love with. But then one day, everything changed. I was cleaning our apartment when I stumbled upon a hidden compartment in his closet. Inside were knives, gloves, and a blood-covered shirt. My heart stopped as I realized what this meant. My boyfriend was a killer. I couldn't believe it. How could the man I loved be capable of such horrible acts? My mind was flooded with thoughts and questions. Did he have a specific victim? Was there evidence linking him to any crimes? And most importantly, was I in danger? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him, but another part of me was scared of what he might do. So, I decided to gather all the evidence I could and go to the police. As I sat in the police station, telling my story to the detectives, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. I was relieved that I had finally discovered the truth about my boyfriend, but I was also heartbroken and scared for what could have happened if I had never found out. The detectives took my statement and assured me that they would investigate the matter. They also advised me to stay away from my boyfriend and not to confront him until they had enough evidence to make an arrest. For the next few days, I stayed with a friend, constantly looking over my shoulder and living in fear that my boyfriend would come after me. But thankfully, the police were able to gather enough evidence and make an arrest before he could harm anyone else. As I sat in court, watching my ex-boyfriend being sentenced to life in prison, I couldn't help but think about how lucky I was to have escaped his grasp. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel guilty for not seeing the signs earlier and possibly preventing any of his previous victims from suffering. It took me a long time to process everything that had happened. I went through a range of emotions: anger, sadness, fear, and even guilt. But eventually, I came to accept that none of it was my fault. My ex-boyfriend was a master manipulator and had fooled not just me, but his previous partners as well. Looking back on our relationship, I started to see all the red flags that I had missed or chosen to ignore. His violent outbursts, his fascination with violence and death, and his lack of empathy for others were all signs that he was not a normal person. But in the moment, when you're in love, it's easy to overlook these warning signs. We often see the best in people and give them the benefit of the doubt, even when our instincts tell us otherwise. I share my story not to gain sympathy or attention, but to raise awareness about the dangers of falling for someone who shows signs of being a psychopath or sociopath. It's not always easy to spot these individuals, but it's important to pay attention to any red flags and trust your gut instincts. It was a typical Saturday night in my quiet suburban neighborhood. I had just finished dinner and was getting ready to settle in for the evening when I heard a loud banging on my neighbor's door. At first I thought it might have been a prank or maybe even a dispute between neighbors. But as the banging continued, I knew something was not right. I cautiously looked through my window and saw two men, dressed in all black, trying to force their way into my neighbor's home. Before I could even process what was happening, they had successfully broken down the door and were shouting and cursing as they entered the house. My heart raced as I realized I was witnessing a home invasion, a violent one at that. I immediately called 911 and reported what I was seeing. The operator assured me that the police were on their way and advised me to stay inside and keep away from the windows. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding in front of me. I saw the two men ransacking my neighbor's home, breaking things and shouting threats at anyone who dared to stand in their way. As I watched in horror, I couldn't help but think about the family that lived in that house. They were a kind couple with two young children, always friendly and welcoming to everyone in the neighborhood. My mind raced with thoughts of their safety and well-being. Tears welled up in my eyes as I heard screams coming from inside the house. The sound of breaking glass and furniture being thrown around only added to the chaos. My heart went out to that family, and I felt completely helpless. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, police sirens could be heard approaching. The two intruders must have heard it too because they quickly grabbed whatever they could carry and ran out of the house. As they fled, I saw one of them pull out a gun and start shooting at the police. My body froze as I saw the bullets flying and the officers taking cover. It was a terrifying sight, and I prayed that no one would get hurt. Thankfully, the police were able to apprehend the suspects without any casualties. I let out a sigh of relief, but my heart was still heavy with the memory of what had just happened. The police soon came to my door to ask if I had witnessed anything and if I could provide any information. I gave them my account of the incident, and they thanked me for calling 911 and staying inside. After they left, I couldn't stop thinking about the events that had unfolded before my eyes. It was a stark reminder that we are never truly safe, even in our own homes. The thought of someone violating the sanctity of a home and causing harm to innocent people was a difficult one to process. The next day, I went to check on my neighbors and see how they were doing. They were shaken but grateful that no one had been hurt. They told me that the intruders had tied them up and threatened to harm their children if they didn't cooperate. It was a nightmare for them, but they were relieved that it was over. As days passed, the incident became the talk of the neighborhood. Everyone was shocked that something like this could happen in our quiet little community. We all felt a sense of fear and vulnerability, knowing that it could have been any one of us. But amidst all the shock and fear, there was also a sense of unity. The incident brought everyone in the neighborhood closer together, and we made sure to check in on each other more often. We also made an effort to enhance our home's security measures and be more vigilant. Personally, witnessing the home invasion had a profound impact on me. It made me realize how quickly things can change and how important it is to be aware of our surroundings. It also reminded me to appreciate the safety and security of my own home, something that I had taken for granted until that night. In a world where violence and crime seem to be on the rise, it's crucial to be prepared and stay vigilant. This incident was a wake-up call for me and my community, and we have all become more aware and cautious.